Hey there, I'm Moriah Lee, NASA analyst, theta healer, and social optimist. Join me as we journey through time and space, exploring the past, present, and future of finding ourselves. Through thought-provoking musings and captivating guest interviews, we delve into the convergence of science and spirit. From tracing esoteric ideas to examining personal narratives, we aim to unite disparate concepts, much like the harmony of physics and spirituality. Welcome to the Unifier. Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode 1 of the Unifier. I am here today with Atara Valentine. He is a certified hypnotherapist, an embodiment coach, and founder of the Seed Level. Atara is one of the most thoughtful and perceptive forces in the self-discovery space that I know of, and I am so excited for you to hear him and his thoughts today. Atara, you raise the vibrations of the spaces you've entered because you've tapped into something. So how did you do it?
How long do you have? So what's really interesting is very few of us end up in this space by choice. I, as a child, thought it was amazing, right? I'd put these outfits together. I thought I was really special. I would sing. I thought, I saw myself through really kind eyes. And it wasn't until I interacted with other people that I realized, oh, this isn't the way other people are viewing me. I was constantly met with this criticism, and I didn't understand it, right? So my whole life, I was trying to understand why I was being received this way when I was really trying my best and it was really just being who I was. Why was I met with so much anger? Why was I met with so much resistance? Right? And I say this a lot, but because it's the truth. Like, my journey of self-discovery really started when I was like 9 years old. Because I started reading just about all different religions, all different spiritualities as like a tween, in the early 90s, because I just didn't understand the point of life. I didn't understand why I spent so much of my life just being exhausted by that because I had to work for everything, right? Like, even just a little bit of kindness, I had to always overextend myself. And in the process of doing that, as I'm sure you're aware and a lot of your listeners are aware, it's really easy to lose yourself when who you were was never accepted, right? You almost want to lose yourself because you've already learned there's something wrong with you. You start looking outside of yourself for these solutions. And so many times you put all of that power on people or modalities or spiritualities or like religion, and you're just hoping to find an answer somewhere. And I became so overly subscribed to everything that was outside of me, the kind of friend people expected me to be, the thing that, I was raised Catholic. And then, I studied Kabbalah for 20 years. Like, I studied Buddhism, I studied Hare Krishna, I studied all of this stuff like through my teens and my 20s, trying to figure out just who I was. And I was trying to find it in other people's words. And ultimately, I ended up landing back on myself in this process of doing all of this work. I got here because I had to, because I wasn't going to survive my life if I didn't figure out who I was and how to stand and live within my own body, because that's not where my safety ever came from. My safety was always environmental, right? Does that make sense?
You're the voice of a generation.
Yeah.
I feel like you're channeling what so many people go through, which is looking for the external source of their peace and purpose. And it seems like to me what you did was that you explored all of these sacred spaces, but in the process you have learned to reveal what is sacred, which is that development is sacred. Life demands more life, and your development is not contingent on the beliefs of other people. It's contingent on your own personhood, which you said that you arrived at that through, it sounds like a journey of curiosity. But
hmm
for people your people who you lead, your clients, they're clearly curious because they're coming to you. But
Hmm.
I'm wondering for the people who aren't even thinking about coaches or these embodiment or empowerment spaces, but still know that they want and need something to
Hmm.
happen. What advice would you give to those people?
I mean, I was the person for so much of my life. Like, I never went to therapy. I was put in therapy as a child to find out like what was wrong with me because I wasn't quote unquote normal, right? In the eyes, I guess, of my parents, right? And so I had a really weird relationship with therapy when I got older, and it's not something I ever went toward because I was like, I knew, and like, listen, this is always who I've been. I went in therapy and I knew I wanted to pick up the Barbie, but I picked up the toy that I knew the therapist would report back to my parents, right? Because this is what you do when you're raised in trauma. I developed this hypervigilance and this awareness of what the environment was providing or not providing for me and how I had to adapt to it at a very early age, right? Because I had physical abuse, I had emotional abuse, I was bullied in school, right? Like I didn't have a safe space. So it's interesting because, and I think a lot of people feel like this. We try and do what we think we're supposed to do to have that sense of belonging, but we never actually belong with ourselves as a result, right? And so I think when we go to these processes or we start realizing things aren't working, a lot of us have so much shame around it, or we'll even compare our problems to someone else's to the point like, oh, well, it's not as bad as this to kind of rationalize why it's okay to not change. Or if we do change, we do it in secrecy. We start, buying books, but we're embarrassed if people find out that we're reading them and we don't feel like we can talk about it to anybody. And we almost punish ourselves, right, for not being who we think we should be, right? So, one thing I'd always say to people is, first of all, the fact that you're even curious, that needs to be your fuel
Mhm.
because that's actually what makes us thrive in our lives because that curiosity allows us to extend beyond our current circumstances, right? It allows us to begin to change the lens that we're looking at the world through and really understand when we land in these spaces that none of us are really who we are. We're how we've been taught to be.
Mhm.
And if we can understand that, and if we can understand that we're just running an operating system that's making all of our choices, right? And that we want to get in this headspace where we're open to learning and being different and trying different things, then when you start looking for things like, and nothing against therapy because I think therapy is a great space for people because so many of us don't even speak our pain, right? We're silently suffering and nobody knows, right? So I think therapy is such a beautiful space to just have someone that you can feel safe with, to open up with and share the things that you don't necessarily understand or the parts of yourself that are too vulnerable to share with people around you because there's an expectation of how you have to maintain yourself in order to maintain those relationships, right? And I think therapy is amazing for that. But the difference between therapy and coaching is we're much more interested in a forward initiative, right? And people, I think, get shocked when they come to me sometimes because, I mean, they fill out an intake form, so I have the basis or their foundation of how they got to where they are. But they really want to talk to me about their childhood. They really want to talk to me about where they think they picked this learning up. And I say to them, like, this isn't what we're doing here. Like, I fully appreciate that you feel safe enough to share this, but any relevant information that we need to work through is going to come up very naturally. We don't have to search for it, right? The moment we get clear and we allow ourselves to be creative and we allow ourselves to set an intention for where we want to be, your subconscious and your nervous system are going to let you know exactly where the discomfort is. So we will address those things in real time. I don't need you to go back and like be hyperventilating on the floor crying, digging up your trauma in order for us to move through it. And in fact, I think it does the biggest disservice when it comes to personal growth because then it feels painful. And if
Mhm.
something feels painful and hard to move through, it's going to be really hard to convince yourself to stay with it and to be consistent.
Mhm.
So I think, and I can't speak for other coaches, but for me, yes, this is a serious space. I want people to feel secure in the information I'm sharing with them. I want them to feel safe, but I want them to have fun too,
Mhm.
because if we can't make this fun, you're not going to come back, right? So that's such a huge, an important piece for me.
Yeah, and I always say this is life itself. And when we're caught in a space where we're only suffering, where we're only choosing suffering, but also just living in suffering as a result of what we our programming, then we're not enjoying it. And there's so much to be enjoyed.
Hmm.
Which is easy for me to say here with you on this like beautiful spring day. But there is so much to be enjoyed, even though
Oh
we
yeah,
have both experienced and live with deep and painful realities, right? We're not. Um, I
100%.
I think sometimes our positivity, people like you especially, people can see the outside. You're so sparkly, and they can say, "Well, he doesn't understand." But
Hmm.
having this conversation with you, having followed your journey, I feel like you do understand. You understand what it is to suffer and to live with that suffering, but also to experience deep joy. You have an abundant relationship, an amazing life that you've built in spite of and maybe because of the things that you've been through. So I would love to hear you talk about that a little bit. Where do you think that your suffering and the trajectory of your pain have played into your journey of discovering joy, peace, and purpose, if at all? If or do you think people can get to this place without extreme trauma?
Yeah, I mean, I want to just reframe something, right? Even the idea of choosing suffering, right? I don't think any of us actively choose, like, you know what I'm gonna do when we wake up in the morning? How can I make my day as miserable as possible? What can I do to myself today to feel like the most disempowered version of myself? Like, said nobody ever, right?
Correct.
However, there are a lot of unfair circumstances that we're met with, right? And so I do this, when I work one-on-one with people, I created this process called the decided self, which is really a creative process where we remove you from the picture and we create a total blueprint of this kind of person, right? How they see the world, themselves, everything. We understand, we work from the outside in until we understand them on a cellular level, right? And what's interesting with this is people read back these beautiful, paragraphs they're writing about how they want to interact with the world, how they want to interact with themselves, because they're dissociating from their beliefs at this point. There's not the pressure for it to be them, right? And I think what's so hard about this space is this is one of the few industries where we put the pressure on ourselves to immediately be the thing that we're not, right? As soon as we have the awareness that, oh, I'm not being authentic, we start judging every single moment we notice we're not showing up honestly, right? But the truth is, great, you have awareness, but now we have to have a little self compassion to actually give ourselves time and space so that we can learn what we need to learn. We need to be able to accept that this is where we're at. We need to understand how we got here, what moving through it looks like, where the resistance is, why that resistance is present, right? And as we gather all of this information, it allows us, just through that repetition and reinforcement and trying things on and trying things out, to actualize, right? And so one of the things I'll do is after we kind of create this blueprint, in another session, we'll start comparing, okay, well, their worldview versus your worldview. And obviously there's this huge gap. So then we spend the time really understanding what's in this gap, what behaviors are reinforcing it, what beliefs are reinforcing it, what actions are reinforcing it, what childhood things are reinforcing it, what are your associations, right? And then people really begin to understand none of this is about walking out of our door and thinking we're in a Disney movie and like, a squirrel comes to us and we feed it from our hand and then like a bluebird lands on our shoulder and it gives us a kiss. Like we know that that's not the entirety of the world. We know that there's a duality. There's pain and there's happiness. There's light and there's darkness. There's yin and there's yang, and that actually creates balance, right? However, the difference is this. It's not about choosing suffering. It's about choosing to believe that the suffering is true, choosing to be limited by the beliefs the suffering has taught us, right? And Not because we want to, again, and I want to be really direct with this because trauma is hard, especially when we have big T trauma, which was my entire childhood, right? So I do know what it feels like to be in a room of people and feel entirely alone, and to feel, even though you are judging yourself way harsher than anyone else, you still believe they're judging you worse than that, right? And taking ownership of that. I do know what it feels like to think you have so much potential and so many things that you want to do, and never feeling safe enough to even take the first step, and resenting all of the progress that happens that other people are making around you. I do know what it feels like to walk into the world and feel like everybody is coming for you, because that's what my life was like. And it's not dramatic here. Like all of my friends, even as teenagers, like I grew up in New Jersey, we go to the boardwalk and whole entire families would turn around and laugh at me and make comments and make fun of me. I was 13 years old, right? So I understand this. And because my nervous system learned I'm not safe anywhere out here, I had to believe that for a really long time in order to understand how to protect myself, right? And a lot of us get stuck in that trap. And no shade and no blame, because we've been taught over and over and over again that this is true. But there's also another truth. And this is what I've learned in working with people and doing this for myself. And people look at me like I'm crazy when I say this sometimes, but when I go through people's beliefs and they're like, I believe that nothing I do is ever good enough, that I'm looked at as an accessory and not a person who has real feelings. And I'll say to them, what is the benefit of believing that nobody cares about you? What is the benefit of believing that your needs don't matter? And they're like, well, nothing. And I was like, no, but there is a benefit, because if there wasn't, you wouldn't be doing it. Right? So I'll say, like, what is that providing for you? And then people will say, well, then there's no new surprise, like disappointments. There's no rejection that I'm not expecting. I already know what's coming. So, oh, okay, so predictability, familiarity. What do predictability and familiarity create? And they're like, comfort. Okay, comfort. When you're in comfort, what does that provide? A sense of control, right? So even the worst things or the things that we identify as the worst things, whether it's a behavior, whether it's casual sex, whether it's, obsessive spending on credit cards. So many people come to me because I'm a hypnotherapist and they're like, session one, Atara, hypnotize me to stop binge eating. And I'm like, but I promise you, that's not actually that's not actually the problem. That is actually a solution that your brain learned relaxes you. That might be your only form of stress relief. I can't take that away from you. I have to understand what you're doing earlier in the day that is knocking you into this space where you're just in your automatic programming halfway through the day. That's where the issue is, not the behavior. The behavior is trying to bring you back into your body, right?
Mm,
But so if we understand this, we don't have to resent any of it. So if we can take that kind of idea and even transfer it over to trauma, right?
mm,
I know safety is very important to me. Even in launching my subscription model that's about to come, how I laid things out, I laid it out in a way so I could see the things that I needed to see happening. So when I released, it wasn't like how many people are going to sign up, right? I created a process where I did certain outreach to my most loyal clients, then secondary clients, and then clients who've scheduled with me, and then the email list to really get people in to see what my numbers were going to be, right? That's a great skill set I learned to create safety for myself versus before last minute, I would be like, that's it. I'm not doing this. I'm not putting this out because I don't want to be
yes.
rejected. And that's how I got the safety, right? But was that safety serving me? Was that brand of safety serving me? No, right? So when we understand some of these behaviors that we're so critical about, or all of these behaviors we're so critical about, are actually serving a really beautiful purpose for us on a deep level, then we can begin to be sympathetic toward it and look at what the other options are. But we never simply want to take something away, right? So that's what my trauma taught me. My trauma taught me also how to be empathetic, how to care about other people, right? My trauma taught me how to be resilient. My trauma taught me how to be strong. And I get to keep all of those things. I earned those things so hard. They are mine. They're not going
They are
anywhere, right?
yours. They're yours.
But because I was in the belief of what my trauma taught me for such a long time, they were always attached to hardship. I've been able to disconnect that now and reclaim the
Mm.
aspects I learned to put aside, right? Which was using my voice, being seen, sharing, exploring, being curious, being surprised, right? All the things that were terrifying, right? That's what we want here. We don't want it to define us for the rest of our lives, and we don't have to.
Oh, there, so many nuggets of wisdom. I'm like, which clip am I going to use to advertise? This is so amazing. I'm hearing so many things, but I guess the big pull from that beautiful channel is that it's both truths. So I think there's a big story at play, and we're only telling ourselves part of the story. It's like paradoxically, we're exactly where we need to be at any point in time. And
Yeah,
if you're suffering, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. If you're on top of the world, you're exactly where you're supposed to be. You're learning the lessons you're supposed to be learning. But paradoxically, you also have the free will and choice to expedite the rate at which
100%.
you learn those lessons.
And
Um,
kind of on that note, if you don't mind, I want to kind of jump
please.
on because, I teach this concept of a perception box, right? Because people think what they think is the truth, what they feel is the truth, right? And yes, your emotions are messengers, but that doesn't mean the message is accurate. Right. So if we can understand like a perception box is essentially like a metaphorical term described to define almost the individual filters that everything it goes through, every experience, every thought, right? And that framework really shapes the way we perceive ourselves, we perceive the world. And it's really just a combination of like beliefs, values, biases, emotions, right? All of this kind of stuff. So it's almost like if we're putting tinted lenses on. We don't know if we're born with those tinted lenses on that are red and have, all these kaleidoscope shapes in them. When we're looking at the world, that's what we think the world looks like. We don't know that we're wearing that lens, right? So as you're doing this work, you
Ugh.
understand that that can change. And the benefit of that, right, of like a perception box is that it filters incoming information so we don't get overloaded. And it allows us to kind of focus on the aspects of reality we learned were important, right? But on one end, while it simplifies understanding of complicated or complex situations, it can also lead to major distorted or limited thinking. So, a lot of times, our perception box will actually exclude any alternative possibilities or potentials because we learned to see things in this fixed way. And that's really what we see so much, even what happens with people's stances, right? Whether it's political, whether it's things that are happening in the world, whether it's something that's happening at work, they're only choosing unconsciously, but there's not even a choice. They're only seeing through the lens that they know how to see the world through. And there's a threat in even believing there's another possibility because that's how we learn to stay safe. But the truth is, if you're someone who's constantly met with or constantly finding or seeing the things that you don't want around you, you're probably unconsciously reinforcing all of these things, which is why they keep showing up. So we can begin to look at it like something we have to learn our way forward through, or something that is going to continue to limit us, right?
Yeah, I think the perpetuation of our own beliefs fits beautifully into your what did you call that term? You said your perception
Perception
box?
box.
I love that term so much, and it will live in my head rent free like so much of what you say does now. Because I think when we are in that perception box, it's very difficult to see the world any other way, right? And I told you this before the call, but just to repeat for listeners, it's so important that growth doesn't happen, that you're breaking out of your perception box or taking off those lenses doesn't happen alone because it kind of can't. What are your thoughts about that,
Right.
Atarah?
Yeah, I agree, right? Like, if you want to learn how to ski, Very few people are going to buy all the ski gear and then just go on a mountain and figure it out for themselves, right? If when you learn math, you don't just open a book and learn math yourself. We're taught. The thing that feels uncomfortable for people is it sounds strange to work with someone to teach you how to be yourself.
And
Right?
paradoxically, you don't want to rely on an outside force, just like religion, like you were talking about earlier, or
100%.
your, your parents' ideas, your friends, whatever, to tell you how to be in the world. You want to figure that out on your own. We all have a sense of an adulthood and autonomy. At the same time, in that autonomous state, for me, it was really important to acknowledge that I could not do this on my own because there are things that I do not see because of my perception that others can see. We
Totally.
each, in the communities that we're surrounded in, each person is bringing some sort of experience that's going to change your perception if you're open to
Mhm.
it.
Yeah.
So why not, choose a space and people to be around, whether or not you're paying them?
Hmm.
Um, why not choose spaces that will encourage the finding of ourselves?
100%. And I want to be clear, and I can't speak on how other people work, but I don't ever tell my clients anything that I think they should be doing. I ask questions so that they land on the answer themselves, right? We get really clear on what it is that they want, which is all questions. I want you to answer this. My first session is them a lot of journaling as I'm answering questions for them to get clarity on what it is that they're looking for. Once we have that marker, everything moving forward is, well, why is that? Oh, and they'll come in and sometimes people who are used to being punished or being externally validated will be like, I didn't do any of my homework you gave me. And I'm like, okay, cool. And they're like, aren't you mad? I'm like, no, I gave it to you because I thought it would benefit you. But if you didn't do it, like, that's fine. It's there. Do it if and when you want to. And like, they're waiting for that reaction from me, right? And then they'll kind of just sit there and I'm like, would you like to talk about why you didn't do your homework? Right? Like that's how I work with people. Like I don't do you're bad because you didn't I don't care, right? If you will do that homework if and when you want to. I'm not here to punish you, right? But if you want to be curious, I'm a curious person. I'm just going to sit here and ask you questions and you will land on the reason yourself, right? I can take what you're saying and I can feed it back to you and mirror it back to you, which is what I do a lot of with my clients, right? I speak back to my clients in their own words. Why? Because their subconscious is going to receive those words because they're theirs. I cannot make an assumption. I have to look at every single person, right? If we take like the Buddhist concept of beginner's mind, I do not care how long I've worked with a client. Some of my clients have been working with for 3 years, on and off, right? Every time I open my Zoom and I sit across from them, I look at them as if I've never met them before in my life. I try to do it with my friends. I try to do it with everything that I do because
Yeah.
it allows me, right, to move outside of that perception box. It allows me to observe what language are they using? Are they a more kinesthetic person? Are they a more visual person? Because you can tell that even by language, right? Like someone who's more kinesthetic would naturally be like, I feel like this is happening, and like I get this weird vibe when, right? They'll speak a lot like that. So I know in working with them in hypnosis, I have to craft an experience more for their body and their experience.
Mm-hmm.
Versus if someone's like, I see what you're saying, or actually what I'm looking for is this, I know those cues tell me they're a more visual person. Does that make sense? So I don't have to come in with an assumption of what we're going to do and how it's going to get there and what I need you to believe. I need to stay so open and so present that I'm understanding your inner workings and I can feed them back to you so that you can accept them. That is my job.
I think that's your job, and as a friend, that's all of our jobs.
100%.
To
As much
come
as we
in,
want to give advice, right?
correct.
Don't.
Right.
Don't try and don't give your
But
kids
it's
advice.
hard.
Don't give your friends advice. Right? So many of my parent friends call me. They're like, "Oh my God, my child is, they're doing this and this," and they just keep telling me, "But you're amazing." And I said, "But listen, if your child is not
That's
feeling
their
amazing right
life.
now,
Yeah.
right? If your child feels like one of my friends' kids are in this phase where They have nothing to offer, right? They're really depressed. They're flat. They don't understand the point of their life. I was like, as a mother, I know that is so painful for you to hear. Like, I see it in your face. I hear that. And I'm so sympathetic to that. However, you're trying to fix her to make yourself feel better. She
Mm.
does not want you to tell her, you're so amazing, you're so talented. She's not seeing that in herself right now. So you actually trying to push that on her is making her feel you don't understand her either. What she wants to hear from you, and this is hard for so many parents, is they don't want you to fix it because it's like, you don't understand, right? They're not looking for a solution. Unconsciously, all they want to know is, this must feel really hard. Acknowledge what they're feeling. This must be really hard. But regardless, I love you and I'm here for you. Period. That's it. As much as we want to fix, as much, and same thing with our friends, same thing with grief. People get, they're in a better place. That doesn't help me. You're saying that because you're uncomfortable with my feelings and you don't know what to do with it, right? When people die, I'm like, I am so sorry. This sucks. This is awful, right? Like, how are you feeling? What is, like, I don't have to tell them anything about what their experience should be. I have to let them know that, yes, this is hard, right?
It's about connection.
It's about connection.
I heard Brene Brown say one time that we don't know and we're not taught what to say when, you know, people die or when people are in extreme suffering. And she said these words that have lived with me and that I've repeated, which is just that when somebody shares something with you or when you find out about, you know, a passing, just to say, I don't know what to say, but I'm so glad you told me because
100%.
they're just looking for connection. And that's, you know, that's it.
100%, right?
Yeah.
So even with giving advice to our friends, and let's take relationships, for example, because this is what I hear so many clients talking about. And I have all these clients coming in and they're like, well, my friend did this, my friend did that, my friend did this, my other friend did. And I'm like, are your friends in a relationship? And she was like, no. And I said, well, maybe they're not the best people to be taking advice from then, right? So as someone who's been in a relationship for 18 years, let me give you advice, right? Because a lot of times we see, let's say, a friend who's in a toxic relationship, but they don't like the guy. He's a fucking asshole. He doesn't treat our friend the way that we think she deserves to be treated, right? And like they break up, right? And the friend's upset. And what do we want to say? Oh, well, they were a fucking asshole and you
They
deserve so much
sucked.
better than
Yeah.
that. And they sucked and blah, blah, blah. And they didn't even treat you good, right? But that's not going to make the friend feel better because you don't know what that relationship represented to them, right? So that's what I'm talking about in asking questions because they might not even know what that represented, right? Yes, this person was controlling or this, but like, well, how did you feel in the relationship? What was it about the relationship that connected to you? What do you feel like you're losing in losing the relationship, right? That's how you get to what the representation is. Because if
Mm.
that person felt like they lost their sense of safety, and you're telling them all the reasons they're better off without it, you're essentially saying you're better off without safety. Does that make sense? Which is why we have to be so careful when we give advice because you don't know the internal narrative that's happening. You don't know what these external things represent for these people. And you cannot give good advice unless you understand those things. So
Mm.
even with, people say to me all the time, I was just with my family for a week and they're like, oh, but what do you say when your mom does this? Nothing. Because I don't need her to be anything different. Like I've sorted myself out. I get to go. I get to experience my family. I love them just as they are. I need them to be nothing else. They need me to be nothing else. It took me a long time to get to that point. However, if my mom comes to me with a very specific question because I do what I do, I'll give her an answer. And even still, she usually doesn't like it, right? And then well, I'm not doing that. And I'll say, okay. I said, well, that's what you're allowed to do. And then she looks at me for the reaction and she's like, well, then she'll come back, right? And ask a question. I'll say, I'm not saying that this is the only way. I'm just saying my dynamic with this person is very different from your dynamic with this person. What dynamic would be would make you happier in your life?
Mm.
Well, if it was the way that
And
you
it's your
are,
choice.
right? Right. So this is the way that I'm doing that. Maybe, I'll give you some suggestions and find a way to create that for yourself where you don't feel like you're overextending yourself. And that's it. Like, I can't say you need to do this and your problem is this. Nobody wants to hear that. Nobody.
And they're not going to listen anyway because
And
it
they're not going
doesn't,
to
the
listen
advice
anyway.
that's being given
Well,
doesn't make
yeah.
sense. I feel like so much of the advice that we receive uh, is not from our friends. It's from social media, from what we see, and we're living in that perception box, right? But
Yeah.
we're perceiving information that we're receiving
Hmm.
from Instagram or whatever. So I'm interested in you as someone who's very present and uses technology so powerfully as a tool. How how do you see our relationship with technologies affecting kind of our, this is a bit of a pivot, but kind of our day-to-day personal processes,
Hmm.
the way that our minds work, the way we live in those perception boxes.
Hmm. Yeah. So listen, blaming technology is like blaming a car for a car accident, right? And everybody wants to blame technology. Oh, social media is toxic, and this is this, and this. Is it? Or is your relationship with it toxic? Is this phone right here that I'm holding, is this ruling my life in this moment? No, I haven't looked at it once. I've actively decided to put my phone on Do Not Disturb, put it aside, and forget that it exists for this hour that we're together. I have choice here. That is my responsibility, right? Here's what I'll say. Obviously, technology for me has been so important. I launched my company over COVID. I work with everybody over Zoom. I work with people in the Middle East. I work with people in Australia. I work with people in Canada. I work with people in Asia. I work with people all over the world. What a beautiful thing to get to do,
You and
right?
I are conducting universal business right now.
100%,
Yeah.
right? And we've never been in a room together. And then, but the beautiful thing about it is all of this melts away and it feels like we're together, right? That's the gift that technology provides. It allows me to connect with my family who live on the other side of the country, and I can FaceTime with them. And this has become so natural to me that I feel them with me, right? When I go on social media, I have a great relationship with social media. I only follow accounts that inspire me, right? I don't even use like my actual my business account. I just go on there, I respond to my comments, I post. I don't look at anything. I have a separate account where I literally follow like 20 things, whether it's fitness, art, lifestyle, things that inspire me. And I don't ever doom scroll. I pick it up, I look to be inspired, I read comments, I respond to things. I am social
Mm.
on social media, right? That's the problem. People have a toxic relationship with it because they're mindlessly using it. If you mindfully picked up your phone, and this is one thing that I learned, because every single person, I would say, when I walk around, any single time they stop, first thing they do, everyone picks up their phone. They're like this. They're walking down the street on their phone. Nobody looks up. No one smiles at each other, right? And I hate that. I hate being at a dinner with people at a table and there's six of you and five of you are looking on your phone.
I always begrudgingly say, guys, can we catch up on our correspondence another time?
Totally. And
Like,
I don't even say it begrudgingly.
yeah.
Like I will say like, do you guys want to go on your phone or do you want to maybe talk to each other? Because if this is what we're doing, like I'm gonna leave,
I'm
right?
gonna do it on
And
my couch.
yeah, no, for what I could do this in a way more comfortable environment,
Correct.
right?
Yeah.
I could be totally sprawled on my couch right now doing this. But it's an important connector if we allow it to be. When I pick up my phone, I say unconsciously, right? If I unconsciously pick up my phone, I pick it up and I go, nope, I do not unconsciously pick up my phone. I say it out loud. And then I'll say to myself, what was it that I was going to do on my phone? And is that important right now?
Hmm.
Right?
But you've
And
trained your mind to ask that question. It wasn't this didn't just you
100%
didn't just decide this in one moment and then it happened the next. You did it over and over until
over
it
and
was in
over
your
and
mind,
over
right?
again. Right?
Yeah.
And that's the thing. That is the phone is one of the most addictive things that we have. Now, even though this might seem silly to some people, if you can do it in that relationship, imagine how that skill set
Mm,
transfers to everything else You know
Preach.
what? Even though I don't want to do this, I'm going to sit here for 10 more minutes and put as much effort into this as possible, right? Or actually, even though I just want to sit here and keep overwhelming myself, I'm going to pause and get up and go for a walk for 5 minutes and then come back to it, right? That's that willpower. Because when we're flipping, right, it's almost like we're flipping ourselves into hypnosis through cognitive
Hmm.
overload, through taking in too much information. People relax and they scroll through social media, but you're still visually processing, you're still auditorily processing, you're still thinking, you're still having reactions and feelings, right? So it's not a great tool. You're actually continuing to contribute to the overload, right? So when we take these pauses, and this is another thing I do in session, we do like a presence session where they leave with 3 practices. And one of the practices is beginning to put consciousness into things that we already do, right? And I'll give them very specific tasks to do that. So if we look at this like that, and we can take that pause, what's actually happening? We're giving our brain a moment, first of all, to be bored, which is so healthy
Oh.
because then it starts piecing together things in the background that we've
Mm.
been thinking about. It gives it time to like kind of sweep things out that it doesn't need anymore, right? Closing our eyes, cutting off visual stimulation because that's the majority of what we're processing. All of these things help us come back into our body. And not just our body, they help us use our brain efficiently. Because if we're overloaded and we're in a stress response and our amygdala is activated, we're not using our prefrontal cortex, our logic,
Mm.
reason, willpower, superior decision making. That's where we make the best decisions from, right? And the thing that gets in the way of that the most is technology, but not because technology is bad, because your relationship to it is unhealthy.
So well said, Atara, as usual. I hear so many things when you talk. I have all these ideas, but I think two big things that I want folks to take away are curiosity. You've been curious since you were a kid, even through the extreme suffering and trauma that you experienced. You were curious, and your curiosity led you to learn and discover to turn you into the man that sits before me today. I think just the discussion of intentionally acknowledging how you're seeing the world, intentionally listening to me, who before today, besides responding to me all the time when I'm hitting you up on Instagram, before today was a stranger, intentionally, pouring yourself into your relationship with your work and your partner, your life partner. You're just a person who chooses intentionality, and you've chosen curiosity, and those things have inspired me, and I know they'll inspire others. So one more question. We're at the end of our time here. I would love to ask everyone this question, so I'm going to, but I want to know what gets Atara hopeful about the future of humanity.
Honestly, I think the thing that inspires me the most or makes me feel the most hopeful is sitting across from people every day and interacting with people who have such a huge desire to change, to be better, to do better, and to bring that into the world, right? And I do not take what I do for granted. I'm so happy to be where I am. I'm not going to say I'm lucky because I've worked very hard to be to this place because so much of me being this place was actually going back and reclaiming all of the aspects of self that I learned to feel shame around. And without those, I could not be sitting across from you right now. And that's really the point of all of this, right? We have to create a space in this world where we are kind to each other. We have to create a space where we understand that we're all in a human experience. We're not that different. However, we also have to create a space where we honor the differences that have made things harder for certain people and try and help them out. Because if we cannot come together as a whole functioning organism, we're going to keep splintering off. And the only people who are benefiting from that are people who are making money off of it. And whether
Mhm.
that, and this isn't like conspiracy stuff, it's just the truth, right? Big pharma loves for us to be sick, right? If we're emotionally unwell, we also need a prescription. If we're emotionally unwell, we're probably not going to take care of our physical bodies. And then we're going to deal with all of these other things like diabetes and cancers and all of these things. So someone is making money off of the fact that we don't know how to take care of ourselves and we don't know how to take care of each other, right? And the only way that stops is by actually giving a fuck about other people,
Mm.
right? And I know this world can feel so punishing, and it can feel like you want to separate yourself and protect yourself and hold on to your belief system so that you can feel that safety, right? But it isn't enough because we all deserve to feel that way, and we cannot do that without each other. And I feel so lucky that I get to contribute in some like teeny tiny way into trying to help make that happen, because that's actually what life is about. Suffering's not just going to disappear, right? Like everything's not going to happen by one person getting everything. We've seen an increase in billionaires and all of this stuff. Is that changing the world by one person doing for themselves? No. And we also see all these people who have a lot of money contributing very little or giving very little back, right? So, of course, we're angry. That gap is getting wider, right? Even politically, hate each other, right? This person hates trans people. This people hates these people. This person hates this. It's like, it's immigrants' problem. It's these people's problem. It's this. It's people in power trying to turn everybody against each
Hmm.
other so that they can stay in power. Like, wake up, everybody,
Yeah.
right? But it's
Yeah.
hard to care about other people if we don't care about ourselves. And that's why this work is never selfish, right? This world, and people will want to tell you, because the moment you start changing, it becomes inconvenient for them because you're not the person that they rely on who always overextended themselves. But you have to prioritize your needs in order to prioritize and show up for other people the way that we need to make this world work.
I have nothing to add to that. I just mirror everything Atara said, you guys. Thank you so much again for being here and for doing the work that you do and for caring about people like you do. It is not a tiny thing, Atara. It is leadership at its finest. And yeah, we're gonna keep doing the work here in Nashville. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
being here with me today. You're showing up in a way that shows other people that they can also show up for themselves.
Thank you.
Um, so I would love to put where folks can find you
Yeah,
in the show notes. When is your My Daily Pages being released?
I'm hoping end of May. Yeah,
Okay, cool. This will be the podcast episode will be released May 10th.
awesome.
But I'll pay attention and definitely drop that in some future show notes and on my
Thank
landing
you.
page.
Thank you. But thank you so much. I had such a great time, and I can't wait to share it.
Yeah, I'll send it to you as soon as it's done. But happy Saturday, Atara, and keep on doing what you're doing, and I'll be watching.
Right back at you.
Bye.
Bye.
I hope you enjoyed episode 1 of the Unifier. At the end of each episode, I'm going to be featuring synchronicities from my friends or listeners. If you would like to be considered for sharing a synchronous story, like the one that is about to follow this blurb, you can reach out. Contact information is in the show notes. And otherwise, thanks. Bye.
Okay, so this is a pretty long story, but I worked at a hostel in Montenegro, and when I started working there, there was 2 guys that were from Australia that were working in the position that I was in, but they were transitioning out. Lockie and Aaron are their names. Yeah, so I had maybe an overlapping week or so of working with them, blah, blah, blah. And then fast forward 2 to 3 years later, I went to Hawaii because I was on my trip to Australia. And this was a 9-month trip. And so me and my best friend Caitlin went to Hawaii, and we were staying at a hostel, and we spent the whole day driving around the island, blah, blah, blah. And we're driving back to our hostel, but it was on a one-way street. So we had to drive through the street past our hostel because it was the only way we could go. And we're driving, and I look over, and I'm like, what the fuck? And I pull the car over, don't say anything to Caitlin. And I'm like, Lockie? He's like, what the fuck? I'm like, what are you doing here? He's like, oh, I'm just on vacation, kind of just traveling around, whatever. And I was like, what? This is so crazy. I haven't seen him in years. He doesn't have any social media. And it just so happened that he was outside of his hostel smoking a cigarette. and had beers in his hand. And it was like, had I missed, had we gone out longer on the island and swim around or whatever, I would have completely missed him and never knew that he was even there. Anyway, so I start chatting with him. I'm like, how's Aaron doing? Blah, blah. And he's like, oh my gosh, Aaron's actually going to be here tonight. Let's all hang out. And so then the following night we went out to a bar and hung out with them, caught up and all this stuff. But yeah, it's super, super crazy and super synchronistic.